Reddit, what's the worst thing a class or student has done to a teacher? Female teacher had a number of miscarriages. Student body nicknamed her Mrs. Carriage. I was present when a kid called her this name in a duck you sort of way. You could see her heart break right then and there. She ran out of the room crying uncontrollably. Even sadder, she fell a few years later while on school property. Hit the back of her head and died. God bless you, Mrs. Wendell. I remember that a colleague of mine had a class. In it was one kid who had already gotten himself in trouble, stealing. Police at his house. You name it. This kid got a hold of her number. Called it, not anonymously. Stupid for him. And her 5-year-old daughter answered. He started saying how he would heal her and hit mother. Throw her off the stairs. etc. Kid got arrested. Expelled and is, as I hear it, doing time for this and a robbery that happened shortly after. When I was a kid we had someone do that at our house. It was like 2 AM and this kid called our home phone. My dad answered and this kid on the other line told him, I know where you live and I'm gonna come heal you. My dad responded back with, no, I know who this is and I'm getting up and I'm on my way to heal you. The kid gasped and then hung up the phone. Not my story but happened to my dad's teacher. When my dad was in middle school he had a teacher who survived a Nazi concentration camp. Who I guess due to malnourishment lost his balance ability, terminology, and had to either walk super close to a wall so as not to fall. The kids in the school used to mock him a lot since it looked silly. That is until the teacher broke down and told the class about why he walked like he did. Maybe not the worst of stories compared, but shitty behavior's nonetheless. One teacher at my high school was broken. I don't know how it happened, but she was a constant joke. Kids would see how far they could push her. They would yell at her in her office after the semester was over to get better grades and she would relent and do it. People would write tests with the textbook just open on their desk and tell her to duck off if she told them to put it away and she would. One time, a kid rolls in the TV on a cart usually for Bill Nye and the likes. Hooks up a DDR dance pad and plays it with the volume loud while she's teaching. She was angry but did nothing. She just shouted over it and taught and pretended nothing was happening. I don't know what happened to her to have absolutely no fight in her. If I remember, her name was Mrs. Dunn and she was therefore nicknamed Mrs. Dunn. I felt so bad for her. Had this teacher who we all hated but loved in hindsight. BC she put up with our shit and we had her for like 2 years in a row. In a row. One week she had some surgery on her ears and she told us she couldn't hear very well at all. So we test the waters and she seriously couldn't hear us if we were loudly whispering. We start playing the Pen 15 game and one kid starts yelling it and other curse words. We tell him to stop and he goes, what? Damn, it can't hear anyway. Then the teacher goes, I've heard everything you guys have said for the past 20 minutes but in that really choked up tone like she was fighting back a fountain of tears. I'll start it off. Obligatory, not my story. It's my dad's. He had a pregnant teacher sometime in middle school. And some of his classmates found it funny to put horse laxatives in her morning coffee. The school found out the boys did it because they were bragging about it. My dad grew up in a farming community. To explain the horse laxatives, I don't know where they carry those. Yes, they were expelled. But I think she had miscarried. Edit, I'm a dumbus. It was horse laxatives and not tranquilizers. I called him to fact check the story. A group of guys at my high school was throwing eggs at other students at the train station on the last day of school for the year. One guy threw an egg at a girl that hit her eye and the cracked eggshell lodged into her eyeball, blinding her. Do you know what happened to them? I would report that to the police. I was not prepared the level of asholishness going on in this thread. I was expecting more pranks and less physical or mental abuse. Kids are insanely mean. A few of us planned a secret Santa for our class. We invited our teacher to be a part of it too. Being the mom of the department, she was very excited. On the day of the exchange, a friend of mine noticed a gift deliberately kept at the bottom of the stairs. It was anonymously addressed to the teacher. She picked it up and passed it on the teacher. Later the teacher called her, asking who the gift was from. According to her, it wasn't very Christmassy. It was a book called How to Be a Good Teacher. She might not have been the best teacher, but that was just mean. The person who did it showed no remorse. Her friends just laughed with her. In fact, when she'd first drawn the teacher's name, she'd immediately thought of this book. When the teacher found out later, she was in denial. Because this one had always been a good girl. She blamed another student who'd always given her trouble. Basically, it was a shit show all around, and we learned never to do anything nice for our class again. In year 7, age 11, my music teacher, think his name was Mr. Rayner or something. There was a girl in my class who didn't like being told what to do at all. She really was a tearaway. Always had been since she was younger. She got pissed off because he sent her out of the room for being rude. So she climbed up on the piano and stamped on it. Spat all over the keyboards. Took the teacher's glasses from his face and stamped on them and pulled his tie really tight around his neck before spitting in his face. She was moved to another school and the teacher just disappeared. We never saw him again. Maybe not that bad in comparison to others, but I still feel sorry for that guy 14 years later. We had a teacher in high school who was a bit odd. It was a nice guy, but everyone could mess with him. I've had this teacher for 2 years. But these stories aren't from me. It was from a friend who was in a different grade and also had this teacher. One time when he was going to use the bathroom in between classes, some students followed him and forced the lock on his bathroom stall. He couldn't get out for over 2 hours. Another time they've taken his briefcase and filled it up with water. Every document in there was ruined. They've also taken all his documents that were placed on his desk and glued them all together. Also ruined. There were a lot of these anecdotes about this teacher. I remember classmates of mine throwing candy at him. He never responded. This was over 15 years ago. In the years I've left this school, I've heard he had taken his life. It makes me sad even now just thinking about it. He was too gentle and couldn't handle being a school teacher. Despite he being a nice person and wouldn't hurt no one. Teenagers can be cruel. I don't know if taking his own life was a result of the constant bullying or not, but I kind of think it was. R.I.P. man. You were too nice to be here. IDK for video is floating around of this still. It was a huge deal in my local town. There was this high school that was known for how bad its students were. Drew Gus. Gang fights, etc. Anyways, in the videos, there's this substitute teacher trying to calm down this unruly class. The class is ignoring him and mocking him. Suddenly, these teenage girls get on top of fire desk and start dancing nasty and super sexual. One goes to the teacher and starts trying to twerk on him. The teacher backs away, but the girl keeps going after him. It all ended up on the news. IDK what happened to the sub? But I believe the girls got suspended. I was in band in high school. My senior year. The freshman class was especially disrespectful to the director. One day they pushed him too far and he sort of snapped. But not in the big explosive way. He told us he had lost hope in us. Calmly walked to his office and locked the door. For a week and a half, myself and the other seniors would come in and lead class. For that time, we came in and made sure everyone got instruments and music. We usually led a group rehearsal for a while and then broke into our respective sections to fine-tune the musical problems. One day, at the beginning of class, the director called my friend and I, the two at the helm of this student leading, into his office and thanked us for proving to him that his work wasn't in vain. When my mother was in school, mid-late 80s I believe, she had this class clown kid in her class. It was a science lesson and they all hated this teacher. Especially this kid. So he secretly told everyone in the class to turn on their Bunsen burners when class ended and to just run out. So they did. As this poor teacher is hurrying around to turn them off, this kid pulls out a match from his pocket and wiggles it while he's standing at the doorway grinning. Apparently the teacher went white and kind of froze. Later on that teacher quit. I don't think much happened to the kid. Another story she has. Not really the worst. Just mean. I'm pretty sure it involves the same kid. They had a religious studies teacher who was all for celibacy till marriage and trying to teach the kids of the importance of it. The kid asks if she's married. She says no. So he ridiculed her for being a virgin the rest of the lesson. We had this teacher for Latin and Greek. She's nice. But she can be a bit boring sometimes. She always wears her hair in a really long braid. Like, it goes to the bottom of her back. Some girl cut off the braid some years ago and was of course expelled. Not my school, but an older guy was a teacher at another high school and the kids didn't really respect him. He had a heart attack while teaching. Started to grab his chest and yell, "Children help me," as the class laughed at him. He then yelled, "Help, I'm dying," and they all laughed harder. I'm sure at least a few thought the guy was joking, but a good majority must have known it was legit and laughed at him. Pretty disturbing. Edit, he survived I guess, and I think he retired. In 8th grade, I had a woodshop teacher who was an old curmudgeonly dude. Hugely tall, seriously like 6'8", and deaf in one ear. He was a nice enough guy if you paid attention and didn't make his life job harder. Some 8th grade kids in my class were being little sheets on the last day of school and wanted to be mean to the teacher. So they snuck out of class on his free period and into the woodshop and into his office, where they ripped to shreds his autographed poster of John Wayne. When the teacher returned and found it, he started crying. Apparently John Wayne was his idol. And well, a personalized and autographed, like in person from John Wayne, poster was not something he was going to be able to replace. As far as I know. Everyone knew who did it, but without any actual evidence no one got in trouble and the teacher retired at the end of the year. A teacher our high school was known for crying, and his son was in his class 4th period. Every period that day he told a story about how he caught a fish over the weekend. As he's telling the story to the 4th period class, his son stands up and yells, "Nobody cares about your stupid ducking fish story," and stomps out of the room. His dad just puts his head down and cries for 5 minutes. I had this teacher in middle school that students enjoyed messing with students, threw things at her when she wasn't looking, put glue in her hair, and other horrible things. Over a decade later, I worked for the district and heard stories that she still gets messed with. One student put a Made in China sticker on her because she is Asian. They went as far as locking her in a closet. My school was relatively tame compared to that nasty shit you're love posting. We had a little group of disrespectful rebels in our school. They would call teachers by their first name, bully teachers, insult them, refuse to learn or do any work, would just walk out of the classroom whenever and would leave campus whenever, knowing that the cops can't really do anything about it. One particular instance I remember well is these two little sheets ragging on one of the school's favorite and most chill math teachers. They were joking about how being a teacher is a joke. The pay is terrible. He's wasting his time. He should do something else with his life if he's that smart, etc. This particular math teacher was a saint, probably still, as if he's still working. He is a real gentleman. Would give a stranger the coat of his back if it meant the stranger was comfortable. He was a real tutor and never minded staying 10 minutes late to go over a lesson that they didn't quite get during class. Basically, he was an amazing guy, and these little assholes made his life hell for that entire semester. At my school we had a year where 2 teachers were arrested for having sex with a female student. One girl was clearly taken advantage of while the other knew the teacher's history and wanted to do this to be able to say she did. Spoiled rich girl type. And after the arrests, she got an innocent teacher arrested by claiming victim intimidation during class. This guy was everyone's favorite teacher. He helped students personally and really cared about the community. That didn't matter. The school put him on leave and he was arrested without any evidence, and with the whole class saying that literally nothing of the sort happened in that class. She has her lawyer contact every student in that class and asks them to testify for her. They all told her to duck off and testified on his behalf. Months later he was finally proven innocent, but the school wanted to move him. He was arrested and lost out on an entire school year, and the students missed their favorite teacher senior year. On top of that, his mugshot was in every article talking about the teachers ducking their students. What a ducking hunt. Later she had her lawyer contact everyone. You'll live in nightmare worlds. Geez. In all my years of schooling, not a single kid was ever disrespectful to a teacher where I live. Even the delinquents were nice to just about everyone. The closest thing we ever got to that were these memes that students made of one particular teacher that became so prolific throughout the school that you could actually find them as the first result when searching his name. Nothing ever mean-spirited, and he knew about them all. I don't know how isolated the area I live in is or whatever, but folks here are just too nice for that. I heard tell of one particular student who yelled at a teacher once, but he had a bad home situation and was real frustrated that day. In 2012, a boy stabbed another boy 5 times during class in my old hometown, and the teacher had to go and pull him off. The stabbed boy survived, but it took a year for him to recover from those injuries. Not my class, but it happened at my high school. There was a teacher who had just taken a year off of teaching because her son had died in a horrible accident. He got crushed by a farming tractor. When the teacher came back to school, one of her classes wrote a song about the accident and they sang it to her on her second day back. She quit that day. The other story is slightly related because his was the school's administration's doing. We had the most wonderful pay teacher. He was very patient with us and would always listen to us and offer advice. So our last year in high school was also his last year there. He was 64 and was considered too old to be a pay teacher, even though he was fit as a horse. We could all tell that he was very sad because teaching was his passion. On his last day, our class bought him flowers and healthy snacks. He cried. 2 years later, he healed himself. He left behind his wife and their 2 adult children. The school held a memorial service and around 1,000 people showed up to pay their respects. Sadly, I couldn't make it to the service, but I cried a lot that day. We had a teacher that was absolutely awful. One day she gave a guy a 0 on his quiz because she thought he was cheating. The dude was this nerdy dude that was just smart AF. Like he made 100s on every test and ended up going to Cornell. When the teacher left the room, he hocked up a nasty eulogy and spit it in her tea and then stirred it in. He never said a word while doing it. The class was in disbelief. When the teacher came back in and drank her tea, everyone gasped and started laughing. The nerdy kid actually kinda gained a lot of respect from other kids after that. There was a math teacher in my high school that everyone loved to have because she was a mess. Kids would have contests to see who could make her cry that period, which wasn't hard. She cried at the drop of a hat. One at the beginning of a new semester, she was doing introductions and telling the class about herself, and one kid asked if she was married and she ran out crying. One time she had a stain on her pants and everyone made fun of her for cheating herself. She cried. One time around Christmas, she did an interpretive sign language dance to a Christmas carol. Everyone made fun of her and she ran out of the room crying. I felt really bad for her. There was a year of high school where I flunked and was pushed into one of the last classes where all the delinquents were, and they made it their mission to see how fast they could chase a teacher out of the class. There was this lady teaching us maths that would always approach every situation with a smile and was patient AF with our class. One day she comes in a bit down and silent but carries on with our lesson. One student made it his mission to be a complete big dick to her throughout, basically ridiculing her for teaching a subject that was as useless as the person teaching it. She packed up her things and left with tears in her eyes. These idiots took it as a victory. Later on, we found out she lost her daughter over the weekend to leukemia but refused to take some time off since our exams were around the corner and she wanted to prepare us for it. She transferred out of our school shortly after. This incident still ducks me up years later and I'm embarrassed at myself for not doing anything to stop it back then. A cousin of mine was in a class that conspired to drop their textbooks on the floor all at the strike of a certain time to freak out their teacher. That's when they found out the teacher had PTSD from his time in Vietnam.
I had a teacher in high school that was an army ranger during the 90s and fought in Mogadishu during the operation that the movie Black Hawk Down was based off of. He was one of the head football coaches and taught history. He was a nice guy. Defiantly not shy of discipline. He had PTSD and on occasion you could see his eyes drift out of focus. Like he was somewhere else. One dickhead in my class, though it would be funny to try and trigger his episodes. He would slam books down and say shit to upset him. Coach was stern. But embarrassed of his PTSD. And didn't say anything about it. I lost it one day when dickhead was ducking with him and cursed him out in front of the whole class. Coach looked at me. Smiled. And went on teaching. I got an A in that class. And not from good test scores.